Okay, in this video I'm going to do the truth tables in the second set of practice problems, and I'm going to assume that you are familiar with the characteristic truth tables in chapter 7 and also these two rules that are in the next chapter, chapter 8. Alright, so we begin by filling in the columns under the P's and the Q. Make sure we didn't make any mistakes. Okay, next I'll start over here on the right. So for the wedge, we're looking at the P and the Q. They're columns under the P and the Q. So true and true is true, true and false is true, false and true is true, false and false is false. That's all for the wedge. Next, we'll do the column under the not sign. So for this not just applies to the P. So we just need to look at this column here. And so if P is true, then not P is false, false. If it's false here, then we're going to put a T there, and false becomes true. Okay, next for the column under the wedge, this first wedge, we're looking at the column under the P and the column under the not sign. So that true and false is true, true and false is true, false and true is true, false and true is true. Okay, so P or not P, that sentence is always true, so we have T's on every line underneath this, underneath the wedge. Now the ampersand is the main logical operator, so it's conjoining P or not P, everything in the square brackets on the left, and P or Q, everything in the square brackets on the right. So we're going to look at the column under the wedge. That's the main logical operator for P or not P, and the column under this wedge. All right, so true and true is true, true and true is true for the ampersand, true and true is true. Now for the ampersand, true and false is false. Okay, we'll check it. We're good. Okay, make sure we didn't make any mistakes. Now, well, we can start over here again. So P or Q. So we're just looking at the column under the P and the column under the Q. True and true is true, true and false is true, false and true is true, and for the wedge, false and false is the only time we put an F under the wedge. Now over here we have P and Q inside the square brackets. The not is outside the square brackets. And so first we have to do the ampersand, and to do that we look at the column under the P and the column under the Q. So true and true is true, true and false is false, false and true is false, false and false is false. Now for the not sign, so the scope of the not is the whole P and Q. And so we're going to look at this column under the ampersand and basically flip it. So if it's true here, we put a false here. False becomes true. False becomes true. False becomes true. All right, now for this ampersand, it's conjoining not outside the parentheses, P and Q, and then P or Q. So not P and Q, the main logical operator is the not sign, so we're looking at this column here. And then for the P or Q, the main logical operator is going to be the wedge, so we're going to look at this column here. So false and true for the ampersand is false. True and true is true. True and true is true. True and false is false. Okay. Let's see, what do we have here? Well, first we'll do this. Okay, so now we do need to be especially careful about the scope of each logical operator. So we can begin with the not signs. So in both cases, we have a not that applies just to the atomic sentence that follows it. Up here, we had a not sign that was outside the square brackets, but here, this not just applies to the P. So looking at this column, oops, we get that. And then the same here. This not just applies to the S. So looking at this column here. Okay, now next we can do the wedge. So the scope of the wedge is the S and the P. False and false is false for the wedge. All right, now we have the double arrow and the single arrow. So one thing we can think about now is which of these two is the main logical operator. That's the one we're going to do last, and that's the double arrow. So we're going to do that last, so that means we have to do the arrow next. We can also think about what's the scope of each of these logical operators. So the arrow is conjoining the S or P, that's the antecedent of the conditional, and the not S, that's the consequent. So to do the arrow, we're looking at the column under the wedge and the column under the not. Okay, so for the arrow, if we have true and false, that's false. True and true, that's true. True and false, that's false. False and true, that's true. All right, now for the double arrow, we have not P before the double arrow. We have everything inside the square brackets after the double arrow. The main logical operator for everything inside the square brackets is the single arrow. So we're going to look at the not sign and the single arrow. False and false for the double arrow is true. False and true for the double arrow is false. True and false, false, true and true is true. Okay, good. Okay, here, this one's actually easier, although we've got more rows to fill in. Okay, we make sure we didn't make any mistakes. True, 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 false, 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 true, true, false, false, true, true, false, false, true, false, true, false, true, false, true, false. Okay, so first we have to do the ampersand, and to do it, we're looking at the column under the Q and the column under the S. So true and true is true. True and false is false. False and true is false. False and false is false. True and true is true. True and false, false. False and true, false. False and false is false. So we should only have trues where both sides are true. All right, that looks good. Now for the arrow, the antecedent is the P. So we're looking at the column under the P. And the consequent is Q and S. So we're looking at the column under the ampersand. True and true is true. True and false is false. True and false is false. True and false, again false. False and true, that's fine, that's true. False and false, that's true. False and false is true. And again, false and false is true. Okay, good. Okay, so the S is like that. Q. Okay, true, 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 false, 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 true, false, true, false, true, false, true, false, true, true, false, false, true, true, false, false, true, false, true, false, true, false, true, false. Okay, we'll do the column under the wedge. True and true is true, true and false is true, true and true is true, true and false is true, false and true is true, false and false is false, false and true is true, false and false is false. Okay, those are all trues. True, false, true, false. Okay, for the ampersand, true and true is true, true and false is false, false and true, false. True here, true and false is false, false and true is false, and false is false. Okay, so we just have a true here and a true here. Okay, for the arrow, we're looking at the column under the wedge and the column under the ampersand. True and true is true. Oops. True and false is false. True and false is false. True and false is false. True and true is true. False and false is true. True and false is false. False and false is true. Okay, good. All right, I'll stop this video here. I'll do the rest of these in the next video.